Hi everyone, it's Tonya, and today I'm excited to bring you a project from start to finish using Marion Smith's Grand Mini Album. I'm going to put a link to the download down below. I'm using a 110-pound bond on a HP color laser jet, and I love how vibrant the colors turn out, and the 110-pound bond kind of gives the paper a richness to it too. Um, I've had this printer since the summer and I haven't had any problems with it, and I've also not had to change an ink cartridge yet. So I'm just flipping through the designs right now to just kind of give you an idea of what the download looks like. These are add-ons to the kit. Love the petal envelope, and then we're going to use these today. So what I decided to do was pull out my Spellbinders label for die, and I'm going to use the middle size there, but I'm only going to cut half of it. I'm going to cut it half from the top, half from the bottom, and that will leave me that center piece for me to fussy cut. Then on this one, I'm going to cut with my Tim Holtz on the edge file tabs. One is going to be on the short edge, one's going to be on the long edge, and then on this green one, I'm going to use the square nestabilities die to make a Polaroid. I love how the flowers frame out the opening hole of the Polaroid too. These are the pieces that I've cut. This is an extra piece from the Polaroid. I'm going to use my label, EK Success label punch, to cut half of it. This is going to give me like a tab. It's really cute. Then on this one, I'm going to cut out the camera, and then I'm going to use the another punch. This is the We Are Memories Keeper tab. These are brand new, and I'm offsetting that so that those numbers are at the tip of the tag, on the edge of the tag. Just adds a little bit of interest to have that extra typography. Then on this piece, I'm going to take it over to my sewing machine and do some stitching on it really fast. Now I'm going to take the chevron and I'm going to cut strips out of it to make it look like washi tape. I wanted it to have those flags. I love the chevron. And this is one of my favorite patterns in the paper, so I really want it to kind of come up to the top of the layout. So I'm going to push all of these extra pieces to the side. I like to do all of my prepping and things before I begin my layout. So it takes some planning, but it's so worth it. I'm going to line that up on the grid of my mat, and then I'm going to find the center point of the chevron and line it up with one of the lines on the mat as well. And then I'm going to place my ruler in that point to make sure I have it straight all the way across. Then I pulled it out to one of the boxes next to it to cut. When you cut, don't cut all the way to the end because you don't want to separate the paper. If you do, you'll never get these to line up again. Sometimes this paper gives you an optical illusion, so you have to be very careful that you're getting it straight. Also remember, if it's being printed, it may slide in the paper tray, so it may not be printed straight. Then I'm going to cut the tips of these off to make these little flags. Aren't they adorable with the little ends? And that's just following the chevron paper. Now I'm going to go back with my gathered twigs, and I am going to prep all of the edges of the little pieces that I cut off. I'm not going to do this on camera, but just to show you. And I also took the tip of that flag and folded it over my finger to kind of curl it up a little bit. Now we're going to prep our background. And I chose this buttercream kind of color, and I'm going to use my Prima Distress tool to distress all of the edges on the layout. Everything I have is kind of tattered and torn, so I kind of want to keep with that theme, and this is one of my signature things to do. Now you can take the rough side of your Prima Distress tool and use it to scrape across the edges, but please make sure you don't lay it on your mat to do that. It will ruin your mat. I just slip my finger underneath it to lift it a bit. Once all my edges are all distressed, I'm going to come back with my gathered twigs distress ink and darken them up. This is a rich cocoa color and one of my favorite distress ink browns. It's kind of a little lighter than walnut stain. It's just a little bit richer, not so dark. Oh, well, it's dark, but it's not so black.
love how the uh, Distress ink makes the edges look like they're burnt. Now I'm going to take some paint that I've pre-mixed with white gesso and Martha Stewart paint that the color was Pool until I got the right color that I was after. And then I took a popsicle stick and I'm just going to irregularly kind of smear it on like a palette knife. I don't want my lines to be too perfect, whether they, where they stop and they start. I want them to look like it's kind of dry brushed on. The paper has a texture in it, so it has a little bit of a grip for the paint, and it's helping to keep things kind of straight, which is not what I want. So I'm going to kind of come from the other direction on this side. Once it's dry, I'm going to take a ruler and draw a grid over the whole paper. Now, I saw this in a magazine and I really liked how the lines were irregular and it just kind of had an architectural feel, but it wasn't like straight lines and complete grid. It was just pieces and parts of it here and there. So that's what I'm going to try to duplicate. I thought that would give like a little interesting kind of background to this layout, since I'm going to be using all kinds of different shapes and with the labels and the die cutting and things. Now I don't want my lines to be too perfect, but I do want them straight. So some of them are going to start and stop in different places. And I'm not going to worry so much about the center of my layout with the grid because it's going to be covered up. So these are just going to be lines that are going to be seen on the edge. On that spot I happen to get a little, my ruler kind of slid, so I want to make sure I cover that piece up whenever I lay my pieces out. Now I'm going to take this ink. It's very similar to the colors in the pattern, and it's really rich and dark. So I'm going to very lightly rub it across that layout to pick up those colors around the edges of this yellow. This is going to make my layout appear to be part of Marion's paper collection, because it's going to kind of give it that same tone as what she used in her papers. As you fan them out, you can really see it. I'm going to start placing my pieces on the paper. I do not glue anything down until I've decided where I want things, and I'm going to start with this Polaroid up at the top. Not sure where it's going to go yet, if it's going to be the picture or not, because it's kind of small. Also, I really like the brackets and I like them pointing outward, so the center piece right there is where my image is going to be. So I just want to kind of layer things and move things around until it all kind of makes sense. You just this is why I don't glue anything down at this stage, because I'm still playing and tucking and trying to decide. Now, one thing that I want to point out is when I do layers like this, I try not to have any gaps in. I want things to overlap, I want them to lay on top of each other, but I don't want to see a big gap between objects. It's one thing if the gap is where you're going to cover it with the final piece like the picture, but you just want to make sure that your lines kind of flow. Also, I don't want to cover up too much of the architectural pieces on that file tab. I have the stitching that wants to be on the outside, but don't cover up that little tab at the bottom, and I don't want to cover up too much of the typography that's there either. So this, sometimes becomes a challenge, but by placing that little label down at the bottom, I've now created that hole. So now I'm going to try and find something to fit in that hole, and that's what layering is all about. Is just, certain things come to the top, certain go to the bottom, but you're just filling in gaps and holes. Try not to leave any gaps. And like I said, sometimes it takes a lot of fussing back and forth to figure out what you want to do. And there I've noticed I've got a hole there, and I've got a hole kind of down there at the bottom I've got to fill. It's always okay to have a hole on your outer edge, because then it's not trap space. If you have it in the inside, then it becomes trap space, and that's not very attractive. I've decided to use, this is one of Marion's other printouts, as it's the one of the journal pieces. I don't think it comes in this collection, but it's just a scrap that I had left over from a previous collection. Or it looks like I actually printed it on the back of the chevron paper. But what I'm going to do is use it on the inside and make the Polaroid my journal spot. Still fussing with that corner, not quite sure what I want to do. I like how the label on the right kind of helps to balance diagonally with the journaling Polaroid thing at the top. So what I decided to do is in that hole just go ahead and add a few more pieces of that grid so it looked like I exposed those on purpose. Now I'm going to take my tiny attacher and just create a stapled border across the edge of that label. And this is just going to kind of add to that kind of office supply feel that I have going on with the file tabs and some of the other pieces. It also gives you a metal element on the layout. I decided that I really wanted that label to be popped up on a pop dot. So notice that whenever I glue, I don't glue all the way to the edge. This gives me the ability to tuck things in. Now the black that's laying down there at the bottom is a bit bright to me, so I'm just taking a little bit of that paint and I'm going to kind of help it to mesh back down into the background a little bit and not be so in the foreground by just taking my finger and rubbing some of that paint across there. I'm also going to add some of that paint to some other cutouts on the page too, and again in the brighter spots, because this will help for it to sink back to the background and become part of it rather than forcing its way up to the top, especially with so many busy patterns. It kind of helps things kind of flow a little better. Now I'm taking this stamp from Hero Arts. It's got a lot of remember when type phrases all over it. Put the paint away before I spill it. Clean off my fingers really good. And now I'm going to take this paint or this stamp that I've inked and I'm going to remove some of it with the baby wipe, and then I'm going to stamp in certain areas. I don't want this a perfect stamp because if you look at Marion's designs, the stamping that's in there or the writing that's in there is not perfect. So I just take that baby wipe to lift off some of that. I decided to throw a scrap piece of doily down at the bottom. It just kind of helps to add a little feminine touch, lace without lace. And now I'm going to come back without re-inking the stamp and I'm going to throw some in a couple of different directions. This particular stamp has phrases on it, and by adding them up and down and left and right, you kind of get a different look. It's very faint on that little label, but I really like how it's there, but it's not in your face there. Now I'm going to add a little bit of washi tape to the layout. It's one of Marion's favorites and one of mine too. The black one is from her romance novel collection from Prima, and I'm going to place it kind of at the top to balance out the dark black that's at the bottom. And then I'm going to come back around here on the side to balance out between the stitching. This is the tissue tape from Tim Holtz that has the definitions on it, and the definitions run in different directions, which will allow me to be able to use the washi tape on the layout going in different directions. See, like this one's up and down, so I'm just going to place it in a vertical position, but I tucked it under that bracket die cut. So you have some things protruding from underneath elements and then some things that are on top of other elements. By placing that piece there, I was able to expose the tip of that bracket die a little better because the two pieces that were on top of each other were yellow in tone. Then I just took my distress stain and just kind of darkened up some of that blue that was on the layout. Now I'm going to add my little flags that I made, and I'm going to go over seams on this layout and direct your eye back down to the photograph. And again, I'm just rolling those flags up so that they kind of have a little dimension. And there, see how I covered up that little seam where those two pieces come together? That's what layering is all about. So all of these flags point back to the photograph, which directs your eye right back to the center of the layout. This one was a bit too long still, so I just trimmed a little off. Now it's time to start adding my words, and I used the black pattern that has the turquoise on it as my pattern for the paper. I used the Tim Holtz typesetter die to cut the letters out, but if you're going to do that, make sure that the pattern is face down on the die so that the letters are going in the right direction. Then I just used my Xyron to trap those little letters and to put adhesive on them because they're rather thin. I was going to move this label over, but it's kind of glued down too much, so I decided to leave it. Now I used some uppercase and some lowercase letters just to add a little interest, and I'm not really placing them on here straight. I'm kind of doing them a little staggered, some up, some down, since they're different shapes. And I tend to start from the middle out or from the left, or I mean from the right to the left. I find that this helps me avoid trap space, and it gets the lettering centered on the project. Now I'm going to add a few of the butterflies and things like that because I've noticed that I have some gaps in some places. On this one these are the Tim Holtz butterfly, and then the large one is, and then the Martha Stewart one is the little one, and I stapled them in the center with the tiny attacher. I like the way the staple looks inside the butterfly, and again it adds that office supply feel to this. I'm just going to mount them there in that corner. And then I have a little gap down here at the bottom too that I wasn't really happy with, where my finger couldn't touch with the paint. So I'm going to add another one of those little butterflies down there at the bottom. And I believe that was the one that was punched with the Martha Stewart punch. And I just punched them out of the envelope that I cut the tab out of and this camera out of. Now I'm going to put this up on a pop dot, and it's going to kind of close in the gap around the photograph. I don't want to cover up the rows though whenever I place this down. Now I've decided I want to soften it just a bit in that corner, and I'm going to mimic the look of these primroses that are on the paper collection. That's one of my favorite patterns. I got this pillar of Prima roses, and I'm going to use some of this Liquitex ink and the metallic gold to do the centers, to match the centers of the flowers in the paper. And once those are dry, I'm going to start layering them together. In the meantime, I thought about making a little seam binding bow. So I'm just doing a figure 8 back and forth. The seam binding is kind of an aqua color. This was a piece that someone had sent me a rack, and it was wrapped up in the seam binding, so I saved it. I love this color. And I'm just using a piece of floral wire in the center to cinch it together, and it makes a cute little bow. And I love how the seam binding is wrinkled, so it just has that weathered look to it. Now I'm going to take some of this Liquitex and just kind of drop it in places around the layout, and it's going to just give it a little sparkle shine in another dimension. I decided that it was just a little too blotchy, so I took a baby wipe and just kind of cleaned up in some areas and then pounced on top of that. But by pouncing, it also leaves a residue on the baby wipe, and as I move around the page, that residue gets spread out around the layout, so it adds just a little more sparkle and keeps the paint from puddling. Now here are my flowers, and I'm going to start assembling them one on top of the other, and then I have these little flat back pearls that I'm going to place in the center. I have people ask me all the time what glue gun I'm using. That's a Sure Bonder glue gun. It's not my favorite because I mean I like it because it has the little nose on it, but the glue doesn't want to go through it sometimes, so it's a bit temperamental. But I like it because it has an on-off switch on the side too. Okay, so I'm going to put those flowers to the side and start assembling them on the layout. I like to work in threes, and I have all these strings hanging down that I'll trim off in a bit. I had taken the layout off camera to actually do some stitching on the layout to kind of bring my grid to the foreground. Now I'm going to add some of these Prima pillar leaves to the layout. I think anytime you add flowers, you should always add leaves. These have kind of a fallish tone to them, which matches the layout perfect. It kind of helps bring those fall colors out that are in Marion's designs. And again, I'm just going to tuck them in around those flowers. Now I've noticed that there's a small hole up underneath the butterflies, and I had stamped these on a piece of the scrap. This is a stamp from Prima. It's in the Songbird collection. Love it because these tickets are perfect little ephemera pieces to kind of tuck in when you're layering, and they're good generic, you know, patterns so that you can use them on just about anything. And even though I had stamped off of the pattern on that, I was going to throw those away, but then I thought, no, they still work because I'm going to tuck that one underneath anyway. So, you know, I'll probably go back on the scraps of that little piece and stamp some more of those just to have for when I put my little book together. So there you go. We have completed the layout, and thank you guys for watching. Thank you for sticking through the long process. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. And I hope you have a great day. Thanks for watching. Please leave me comments.